Hi, I'm Matthew Fontaine. I'm from Red River College in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm a cross-connection control specialist, and today I'm going to teach you how to test a pressure vacuum breaker using a TK99E 5-valve test gauge. So as always, first rules is you got to notify the owner or occupant that you're going to be there to test the device. You want to make sure that they are aware that the water could be temporarily turned off. Then you want to identify the unit, so you want to walk up, make sure that the rating plate and the serial number and the model number of the device that you're testing matches what the test report is. Then you want to observe the device itself, make sure that there's nothing connected to it that shouldn't be connected to it, make sure that it's in the right orientation and it's in the right direction of flow. Once you've done that and you've established all that, then you can go and bleed all your test cocks. So I'm going to bleed test cock number 1. We'll bleed test cock number 2. So we've bled the system. Then we're going to remove the little canopy that's on top. So we remove the canopy. Now we want to take an inspection and take a quick look at the air inlet valve. We want to make sure that there's no damage to the air inlet valve. We want to make sure that there's no water leaking out of the air admittance valve. Okay. So then once we've done that, we are going to test when my air inlet valve is actually going to open. So to do that, we're going to take our pressure gauge, going to take our high side hose, we're going to hook it up to test cock number 2. We're going to make sure that our high side valve is in the open position, and we're going to close our low side. We're going to close our vent, and we are going to close the bleed valve on the low side. We are going to leave the bleed valve open on the high side, so that way the gauge isn't going to quite slam as hard as it should, but it will gradually increase, so we want to try to control that as much as we can. So we are going to open up test cock number 2. As you can see, the gauge kind of increased. We are going to close our vent. So now my vent is closed. And we are going to close shutoff valve number 1. Now, we want to hold our gauge so that it is at the same height as our air inlet valve, and we're going to slowly open up our bleed valve and allow the water to slowly flow through, and our gauge will gradually start to drop. Right? Our gauge will slowly start to drop once my pressure gauge is already starting to fall. So that's at 0, our gauge is dropping. And we want to take a look at when our needle automatically dropped, which then indicates that my air inlet valve opened. And it was approximately around 2.3, 2.2 psi when that actually popped open. It is above the minimum requirement of 1 psi. Therefore, the air inlet valve on this pressure vacuum breaker passed. It held tight and opened up when it was supposed to open up. The next test that we're going to do is we are going to test check valve number 1. So we're going to close and shut off test cock number 2. We'll take our hose off. We will reestablish water flow through the device. So we'll open up shutoff valve number 1. And we'll then hook up our high side back to test cock number 1. Again, making sure that my low side, my vent, and my vent bleeder valve are all closed. I want to make sure that my high side bleeder vent is open and that my high side is open. And again, we're going to slowly open up test cock number 1. Trying to prevent our gauge from slamming. So if we open that up way too fast, that needle on this gauge is going to slam all the way to the other end, and it could damage the internal components or the magnet that's actually inside the test gauge. So again, we are going to keep our gauge at roughly the same height. We are going to close our bleed vent, and we are going to shut off valve number 1. We are then going to open up and drain on the downstream side of check valve number 1. So our gauge is dropped. Our air inlet valve has now opened. We have water draining from test cock number 2. And I'm going to wait until the water stops draining from test cock number 2. And then I'm going to look at my gauge pressure. So my differential pressure gauge is reading 1.8 psi. That tells me that the spring rate is 1.8 psi on check valve number 1, forcing it closed. So I need more than 1 psi on check valve number 1. 1.8 is greater. Check valve number 1 has then passed and considered to be closed. Depressurize the gauge. Bleed it all out. We're going to close off test cock number 1. We're going to reopen up shutoff valve number 1. And again, all I'm going to do now is double check and make sure what my line pressure is, which I could have done in the previous step, but just in case you're not using a 5-valve gauge that actually has line pressure, you would actually hook up another pressure gauge with your hose and you would actually read your line pressure. So again, shut off valve number 1, maintain at approximately the same height, close your little bleed valve, and you can now read what your pressure gauge is reading, and I am reading 40 psi on my line pressure coming into my device. So again, we'll just close that off, reopen up shutoff valve number 1, disengage our pressure gauge, and then the last step that we have to do before we put the whole system back into operation is actually bleed off my test cocks again. So bleed off test cock number 1 and test cock number 2. And then open up shutoff valve number 2 and put the pressure vacuum breaker back into service. From Red River College, I'm Matthew Fontaine.